For 13 days in October 1962, the world lived closer to nuclear annihilation than at any other moment in history. At one point, a single submarine officer's decision stood between peace and a full-scale nuclear war. How did John F. Kennedy navigate the most dangerous standoff of the Cold War? And why did the world survive? Let's step inside the crisis that nearly ended civilization. By the early 1960s, the Cold War was locked in a dangerous stalemate. The United States and the Soviet Union possessed thousands of nuclear weapons, but geography still mattered. American missiles were stationed in Turkey and Italy, within striking distance of Soviet cities. The Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, wanted a way to even the balance. Cuba became the answer. After Fidel Castro's communist revolution in 1959, and the failed US-backed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, Cuba turned decisively toward Moscow. Secretly, the Soviets began installing nuclear missile sites just 90 miles from Florida. On October 14, 1962, a U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba. The photographs were unmistakable medium-range ballistic missiles under construction, capable of striking Washington, New York, and most of the continental United States. The next day, President John F. Kennedy was briefed. Rather than reacting publicly, he formed a secret advisory group known as EXCOM, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. For days, the world knew nothing, while the most powerful people on Earth argued behind closed doors. Kennedy faced brutal options. An immediate airstrike might destroy the missile sites, but it could also kill Soviet personnel and trigger retaliation in Europe. A full invasion of Cuba almost guaranteed war. Doing nothing would allow nuclear missiles to become operational. After intense debate, JFK chose a middle path, a naval quarantine, carefully avoiding the word blockade, which would legally imply an act of war. On October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the nation. Calm, direct, and firm, he revealed the missiles and announced that Soviet ships carrying weapons would be stopped at sea. For days, Soviet ships approached the quarantine line. US forces went to DEFCON 2, which is the highest alert level ever reached, just one step away from nuclear war. Behind the scenes, tensions escalated. On October 27th, later called Black Saturday, 3 separate events nearly triggered disaster. A US U-2 was shot down over Cuba, killing pilot Rudolph Anderson. Another U-2 accidentally flew into Soviet airspace, almost provoking interceptor launches. And a US destroyer dropped practice depth charges on a Soviet submarine, unaware it carried a nuclear torpedo. Only one man, Soviet officer Vasily Arkhipov, refused to authorize the torpedo's launch. His decision likely saved the world. Publicly, Kennedy demanded the removal of Soviet missiles from Cuba. Privately, diplomacy moved fast. Khrushchev sent 2 conflicting letters, one conciliatory, one aggressive. JFK responded only to the first. The final agreement was carefully balanced. The Soviet Union removed its missiles from Cuba. The United States pledged not to invade Cuba, and secretly, the US agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. On October 28, 1962, Khrushchev announced the missiles would be dismantled. The crisis was over. Kennedy's greatest strength during the crisis was restraint. He resisted pressure from military leaders who favored immediate attack. He kept communication channels open, and he allowed time, something almost no one else believed possible. The result wasn't victory in a traditional sense. It was survival. Both sides learned a brutal lesson. Nuclear war could begin not through strategy, but through misunderstanding, miscalculation, or human error. The Cuban Missile Crisis reshaped global politics. Within a year, the Washington-Moscow hotline was installed, allowing direct communication between leaders. In 1963, the Limited Test Ban Treaty was signed, reducing atmospheric nuclear testing. The crisis also redefined presidential decision-making. Future leaders studied JFK's approach: secrecy balanced with transparency, strength paired with diplomacy. In a world where nuclear weapons still exist, and new powers possess them, the Cuban Missile Crisis remains a case study in crisis management. It shows how close the world can come to disaster, and how human judgment, not technology, ultimately decides outcomes. Every modern nuclear standoff echoes October 1962. Understanding this crisis isn't just about the past, it's about recognizing how fragile peace really is. If this deep dive into JFK and the Cuban Missile Crisis helped you understand how close the world came to nuclear war, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. And don't miss our next video on Cold War nuclear strategy, the doctrines built in the shadow of this near catastrophe.